Well, thank you very much. I think I think the well, thank you for your endurance for the last 2 days. The, we digged really deep on a very, very critical issue in development. That is a structural transformation. I think the title of this conference is Economic Transformation. I thought that's too general, but our discussion actually focused very much on structural transformation. I'm not going to say too much. Just to try to share with you some of my reflection. One is theory. Do we have a theory for structural transformation? Or do we have a theory for development? I think some of the very senior Ghanaian colleagues said that, no, we don't need theory. We don't need theory? Very academic people to come here to tell us what we should do and then go back to write a book and write journal articles. But to me, I think we do. We do have theory. The theory will guide us towards our vision and the goals. I think that the Ghanaian official mentioned about Deng Xiaoping's theory or the practice, very practical. But actually, he had a theory. He had a goal, vision. That is the development. That is the market. Use a market to allocate the resources. Use a market to create incentives for every sector to engage. I think that is a theory. So the structural transformation also has a theory. That is resource allocation. So resource can be allocated among different sectors more efficiently to make sure that the marginal returns from these different sectors will be equal. We know that when the marginal returns are equal, the total economic efficiency will be maximized. However, I wanted to go beyond the economic efficiency. That is social development goals, inequality and poverty. And Ravi touched that a little bit. Can we allocate our public resources to make sure that the marginal return to economic growth, to poverty reduction, or to the reduction of regional or inequality will be maximized? I think that is our theory. The second is the data and the facts. We have discussed so many trends, so many phenomena, but in many cases, we don't have good data to back up what we have said. So we do need to make sure that we have good data, correct facts to support us. Even GDP, how do we measure the GDP among 3 different sectors? The definitions are very different. Definition often change over time. Shashi told me that here in Ghana, they even don't measure GDP by different regions. Now, how can you have a GDP at the national level if you don't have it at the regional level? How do you aggregate them up? Then the informal sector is another black hole. How do we measure the employment and income, poverty reduction impact on the informal sector? I don't think we have an answer on that. Labor quality, I think Maggie and Danny's paper measured the labor productivity gaps among different sectors or even among different countries. However, if you don't adjust the labor quality, then you will see the gap. For example, in many countries, if you just use the labor stock without adjusting the quality, usually the labor productivity in the urban sector is twice as big as the rural sector. That's because the rural labor is more educated, usually with a college degree. For rural agriculture labor, usually it's maybe primary school education. So if you don't adjust that quality, then the gap will exist. So how can we really make sure that we do compare the apples with apples, not with oranges? Then the methodology, we have used CG model. We also used the econometrics to calculate the marginal returns to simulate the potential impact. But I don't hear much about the household level impact, how the structural adjustment would affect household level income or well-being. I think that's one of the issues we needed to tackle in the future. Another issue is how the global landscape will affect African development model, will affect African structural transformation. I don't think we have not, we have, I don't think we have discussed in detail yet. In the next 20 or 30 years, some of the emerging economies, China and India, Brazil, will really take off. And their structural transformation will affect this region fundamentally. For example, some recent studies in China and India show that their demand for food or their demand for import of food in 2030 or 2040 will be about 300 million metric tons. So if you use $500 per ton as a price, that's almost $150 billion opportunity. So the demand for import is there. So who is going to provide that supply? I think that creates a great opportunity for Africa. So Africa has to have its own model, not to duplicate what China, India have done. So where does Africa fit into this global landscape? So when the Japan started in the 60s, 70s, they basically used the US model, industrialization. The people move out of agriculture sector. After Japan, it's Taiwan and South Korea. And after that is Indonesia, Malaysia. So the industry began to move, labor-intensive industry began to move from US to Japan, from Japan to Taiwan, North Korea, now then to Malaysia, to Indonesia, now to China. After China is Cambodia, Vietnam, now Bangladesh. The recent country is Bangladesh. Why that sort of labor-intensive industry has not moved to Africa? Why is that? How does Africa fit? Somebody mentioned that, well, because labor is not that cheap. There is enough land. So where does Africa fit into this global landscape in its own structural transformation? And then how can Africa use the emerging economies as a way to change their structure through trade, through investment, and through mutual lending? Trade, I have mentioned. The global food prices will continue to rise. So Africa needs to pay more attention to that opportunity. The investment, many have mentioned about the potential investment from emerging economies to this continent. So where we should target that investment, how can we bring more investment and make sure that investment will lead to more poverty reduction and then probably more agricultural growth. So that's another issue we should really take into consideration, particularly in some of our modeling exercise to look at the future structural transformation. Then in terms of policy, we do know that the overvaluation of exchange rate hurts industrialization, hurts productive sector, hurts agriculture. So how can we really let's make sure the exchange rate will not be overvalued? Then we have heard about the resource boom, including this country, Nigeria, Mozambique. At least half of the case studies presented here involves resource boom. Do we have a strategy to make sure that the resource boom will not become a curse? Can we use the revenue generated from resources to develop the productive sector, well, including maybe service sector? We don't know. It really depends on how big, how large the economy is, what are the resource endowment. So make sure that the resources will generate certain revenues that can be targeted to develop productive sector to avoid this so-called Dutch disease. Sorry, we have a Dutch colleague here, so we have to call you the Dutch disease. The governance, we mentioned about this governance, how can we really make sure that particularly the local government can really have incentive to promote their local economy. So that's another issue that needs more attention in the future. But finally, I wanted to emphasize the capacity. That goes back to my opening remarks. So this continent has a vacuum of capacity. So capacity in research, in data connection, in policy making, in almost in every aspect. Again, so IPRI plays a critical role here to work with our partners to strengthen the capacity in one aspect, that is in policy making, particularly with regard to agricultural, rural development, the overall poverty reduction, and economic transformation.